Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Trailer Park Show. We have a different kind of show this evening. I guess that's why we have a different type of background. We have the state capitol in the background. We have two Court of Criminal Appeal races that we're concerned about today. One involves Court of Criminal Appeals Place 5, which is Brent Walker, Brent Webster, who's sitting on the end here. On the other end is Brian Walker, who's representing Scott Webster, who's the other candidate for the position.
Scott Walker.
Scott Walker.
Thank you.
Brian Walker represents Scott Walker, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep. Thank you.
And the other one is Court of Criminal Appeals Place 2, which features Ray Wheless and Mary Lou Keel, who was unable to appear, and we sent an invitation to her, but she was unable to appear. Her brother was supposed to be here, but as of now, he hasn't shown up. We also with us is Mark Pulliam, who's with the Travis County Republican Club, as I know it, and he's helped us out on the show a few times also. I'd like to lead off with have the candidates or the representatives introduce themselves. Beginning with Mr. Webster.
Yes. Well, my name is Brent Webster, and do I need to talk into the microphone, or is that?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Brent Webster, and I live here in the Austin area. I grew up in the Houston area, and came here for college at Southwestern University up in Georgetown. Met my wonderful wife there, and ended up going to law school at U of H in Houston, and as soon as I could come back, I came back here. So I've been here for my entire career. I went up through the ranks as a prosecutor up in Williamson County, and tried everything from misdemeanors all the way to murder, written some appeals. And so my wife and I, we make our home here in Austin now. I am a constitutional conservative, and I'm running for the Court of Criminal Appeals Place 5.
Mr. Walker?
Yes, my name is Brian Walker, and I'm here on behalf of my father, Scott Walker. Like myself, my father, Scott, is a practicing attorney, and so he sends his regrets that he couldn't be here, but he had a couple of settings this afternoon that he had to appear for in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where he practices law, like myself. I'm an attorney in the Fort Worth, Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have an office in Fort Worth, as my father does. And my father, Scott, is a longtime Texan. He was born and raised in Texas. He's been married to my mother, Pam, for 40-something years. I think it's over 42 years now. He is a constitutional conservative, a conservative Republican. Been a Republican his entire life, even when it wasn't popular. And he's just a good guy with integrity. Has a lot of experience in criminal law, a lot of appellate experience in criminal law, and I'm happy to be here to represent him today.
Mr. Wheless, would you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely, my pleasure. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for having me on the show tonight, and I'd like to thank all the listeners for tuning in and listening. I'm Ray Wheless. I'm a judge in Collin County, Texas. I've been a judge for 15 years. Before that, I was in private practice for 20 years in Collin County. I've been involved in the Republican Party the entire time I was in Collin County. Started in 1980 when I moved there. I was a precinct chairman, election judge, vice chairman of the party. I've been very involved in the party. I was co-chair of the Lincoln Day Dinner. I've been appointed by 3 different Republican governors to statewide offices. Currently, I serve as chairman of the Specialized Courts Advisory Council to Governor Abbott, and I'm president of the Texas Specialty Court Association. I've been very involved in drug court programs in Texas, and I'm considered a pioneer in the drug court field in Texas. I'm a general jurisdiction judge. I hear civil, criminal, and family law cases. One week I might try a murder case, and next week I might try a civil case. I've done it all, seen it all, every kind of case that there is. And so I think a person with a broad background is the best person for this court, and that would be me.
I had a question for each of you. Now, the races you're in are what we call down ballot races, and they're really kind of not high profile, sexy, exciting type of races that like a governor's race or anything like that. Why should the average voter be interested in your race?
I'd love to jump in there. So, I've been traveling the state campaigning, and what I like to do is I like to hear from the voters that are engaged at different locations and hear what they're concerned about. And the great thing about the Court of Criminal Appeals race this year is we have lots of high-profile cases happening around the state involving criminal law. And a lot of people, they don't usually pay attention to the Court of Criminal Appeals. But what I've found is a lot of voters are concerned. They've expressed concerns about the prosecution of Governor Perry. They've expressed concerns about the prosecution of General Paxton. They've expressed concerns about the prosecution of pro-life journalists in Houston. And, we can't comment on those cases. We can't tell you what our opinions are of those cases. There's ethics rules that prevent us from doing that. But the nice thing about this race now is the voters are aware that this court handles important cases that deal with our constitutional rights, that deal with our statutory rights, deal with statutory law and statutory construction. And it's important that who goes to these courts. Because these voters, they care about those cases, so they really care about who is being elected. And that's why it's so important that constitutional conservatives are elected to the bench.
So on that point, some things that Brent hit on that I do agree with. There's important cases that are going to be at the Court of Criminal Appeals in the future, just as there has been recently. One thing that I think it's important for the average Joe who may not be an attorney, and some attorneys don't even realize it, because when I've talked to attorneys, some of my own colleagues, about Dad's candidacy for the Court of Criminal Appeals, I've had some of those attorneys say, well, which Court of Appeals is this? And I have to remind them, because if you don't practice criminal law, you may forget that in Texas we have a bifurcated superior court level. There's 48 states in the United States that have one Supreme Court that handles civil matters and criminal matters. But in Texas, like Oklahoma is the only other state that has a Supreme Court which handles the civil matters for the state of Texas at the highest level. And then you have the Court of Criminal Appeals, which handles the criminal matters at the highest level and the appellate process in the state of Texas. Of course, Oklahoma always likes to copy the state of Texas because we typically do things pretty well, and they copied our Constitution many years ago, and because of that, they also have what's called a Court of Criminal Appeals that handles their superior criminal cases in the state of Oklahoma. But in Texas, it's important, this seat, both of these seats for the Court of Criminal Appeals, because if an individual is accused of a crime, wrongfully or not right, they have an opportunity to appeal to one of the 14 courts of appeals throughout the state of Texas. And if there's a fundamental error or some kind of procedural problem in the case, then at that point, if the Court of Appeals doesn't agree, then they have a right to file a petition for discretionary review to get to the CCA, the Court of Criminal Appeals. And they have that ultimate say. And of course, they have some direct appellate authority in capital murder cases and things of that nature. And so it's extremely important because in some respects, it is the last bite at the apple for individuals accused of a crime in the state of Texas.
Okay. So is it the case that those 14 courts of criminal appeals from which appeals are taken, do those courts handle both civil and criminal cases?
They do. They do.
Is there frequently a difference in terms of the quality of the judging that goes on because the lower appellate courts have dual jurisdiction, so to speak?
Well, I mean, so back in the day, 100 years ago, attorneys typically practiced almost everything. They do a little bit of family law, a little bit of criminal, a little bit of civil. But as the state's gotten larger, it's become more metropolitan. You have more and more attorneys. It's more commonplace for attorneys to start, not necessarily specializing, but typically focusing their practice on, one, maybe two or three areas of the law. Today, we have a situation where you have a lot of attorneys who do just criminal law, or you may have some attorneys who do just civil law. And as you're asking and mentioning and alluding to, those 14 courts of appeals, because they do civil and criminal law, they ultimately pull from elected judges sometimes that may not know anything about criminal law, and some judges who may not know anything about civil law. The quality of judging may vary, but at the same time, those judges would probably argue once they get there, they have the ability to make themselves abreast of those areas of the law. I think it's a matter of opinion, really. Are you going to get more specialized opinions at the Court of Criminal Appeals when it comes to criminal matters? Absolutely, because typically you have judges at the Court of Criminal Appeals that are criminal practitioners who make their way up to that level.
Okay, Ray, what in your opinion and view, why are these races important?
Well, because the Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest court in Texas for criminal cases. The Court of Criminal Appeals is the last stop And then after the Court of Criminal Appeals, the only thing left is United States Supreme Court. So if a Court of Appeals in Texas, like we said, there are 14 of them, if there's a mistake that's made and the court has ruled improperly, the Court of Criminal Appeals is the place to get that fixed. The Court of Criminal Appeals historically heard all criminal cases in Texas. In 1980, criminal cases were shifted to the courts of appeals. Before 1980, we had what was called the Court of Civil Appeals, and all they heard was just civil cases. And then in 1980, they started also hearing criminal cases. So then the Court of Criminal Appeals, their workload went down with the shifting of those cases to the courts of appeals. Now, here's the thing about the courts of appeals in Texas is that all of the courts of appeals in Texas hear both civil and criminal cases. And a lot of those judges from the courts of appeals in Texas come from the ranks of other courts, district courts. Nearly all of the district courts in Texas are general jurisdiction. There are some specialized courts in Texas that hear just civil or just criminal, but the overwhelming majority, probably 95% of all the district courts in Texas, hear both civil, criminal, and family cases. So we have judges all the time from these general jurisdiction courts who take positions on the courts of appeal and then later go to the Supreme Court or go to the Court of Criminal Appeals. Not uncommon, happens all the time.
If I could jump in here briefly, hopefully the people who are watching this show are people who are very interested in elections and how our government works. And the thing about these judicial elections, and in particular the runoff election that's coming up on May 24th, it's very special for a couple of reasons. One is Texas is one of the few states in the United States that elects all of its judges in partisan elections. And so the candidates sitting here at this table are the nominees or the candidates running for the Republican nomination for either place 2 or place 5 to the Court of Criminal Appeals. In most states, judges are appointed by the governor, or they're vetted through some kind of a bar association screening committee. Here, the voters get to choose who is going to be serving on these courts, and that's a very significant responsibility for voters, and it's a responsibility that they should take seriously and make sure that they know who it is they're voting for. Because the Court of Criminal Appeals is literally the final court in our Texas system for criminal cases, that somebody like Michael Morton, who was wrongfully convicted, that's his last stop. He could spend the rest of his life in jail if he does not get a fair and informed hearing from the Court of Criminal Appeals. So I think the March 1st primary, we had a number of candidates that were running for each of these seats, 4 of them for place 5, I believe. And we're having a runoff because nobody got the 50% plus 1 that it takes to get the nomination. Some of the candidates have more experience than others. Some of them are already judges and are going from a trial court to an appellate court, or trying to. But I think the voters really need to look at this race and make sure that they know who it is they're voting for. We had a problem here in Travis County where we suspect that maybe our chairman got elected because people thought his name looked better on the ballot. So I would urge voters to pay attention and do their research, and when they vote on May 24th or early voting, that they have take a really close look at the candidates first.
I had a question, first of all, for the the candidates for place 5. My first question would be, I practiced law for quite a bit of time myself, and one of the frustrations that I experienced as a practitioner, particularly in the area of criminal law, was the difficulty of getting prosecutors to comply with discovery requests. And I think this was something that the Michael Morton Act was aimed at. And even though it's been some time since that act was passed, I, as recently as last year, had a problem in Harris County with that kind of thing. How do you feel about that and prosecutorial misconduct in general?
Let me take this one first, if you don't mind. As an attorney, yeah, that's been a problem. And statewide, prior to the Michael Morton Act, you had different DA's offices with different policies. Some had open file policies, Some of them would refuse to show you a police report if you asked to look at it, based on, what they thought it would do to the winnability of the case. I think that as a practitioner, when I was a prosecutor right out of law school for a couple of years, and as a prosecutor, you take a separate oath, and I still do some prosecutions in the military, in the JAG Corps, as an Air Force reservist, but you take an oath to seek justice, and there are some prosecutors out there that forget about that oath sometimes, and all they care about is winning their case and getting those notches on the belt and getting convictions. And that's just a terrible thing, because obviously, at the end of the day, every person is endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and by God, these are people that have a right to be heard. They have a right to due process. They have a right to make sure that their cases are looked at, and people care, that they're passionate about making sure that no individual like Michael Morton is wrongfully convicted. But prior to that time, we had a situation like Williamson County, where Mr. Webster has practiced now for the past 10 years, at the DA's office, and prior to that at the county attorney's office, where you had these close file policies, and you had certain people who weren't able to get the information that they needed. And it finally came to a place where I've seen a pendulum swing in a good direction because of Michael Morton. It was terrible that he was convicted. It was terrible that he sat in jail for as long as he did. But the one good thing that came out of his case is that more people are aware of, it's not just about getting convictions. It's about actually finding out the truth. And I'm starting to see, I've had the frustration, I'm starting to see, in my opinion as a practitioner, and I think my dad would agree with me, that more and more prosecutors are beginning to take their oaths more seriously. They're beginning to see that, they need to provide any information that may even appear to show that an individual is not guilty of an offense. And I think, that's why this race is important. It's another reason, when you ask that first question, why the Court of Criminal Appeals is so important, is because you've got to be able to make sure that due process there. Here's the deal, every victim of a crime has rights, and you want to protect their rights, and you want to protect their interests, and you want to make sure that justice is had as a judge of any criminal court. But at the same time, individuals accused of a crime, they have their due process rights as well. And maintaining that balance is a hard thing to do, and it requires judges with experience. It requires judges with wisdom and integrity, judges who care about every case and about every individual and both sides of the equation. And so I'm starting to see, I think, more fairness in the process. Of course, it's never going to be perfect. And of course, I haven't practiced in Harris County since, I went to law school there, but I haven't been back since. But I'm not sure how they do things there. But up in Tarrant County and the areas where I practice, I'm starting to see a lot more prosecutors who really take this idea of turning over evidence, if it tends to be exculpatory, or all evidence for that matter, a lot more seriously than they used to.
What's your experience in that regard, Brent?
First of all, I want to clarify for our viewers, we still do not know what Scott Walker believes. This is Brian Walker, his son, expressing his opinions on this situation here. So I'd encourage the viewers to go out and find out what Scott Walker believes, see if you can find that online or anything, because, again, these are Brian Walker's opinions, and he is not running for office in this race. So my opinion of this is, and first of all, I want to clarify a few things. My entire career, every file I've ever had has been an open file. I've allowed every defense attorney that has come before me in a case to review my entire file from start to finish, and that's the best practice. And in Williamson County, in the county attorney's office, they have had an open file policy long before the Michael Morton Act came open. In fact, it was one of the more progressive counties, county attorney offices in the state. We moved to have paperless files faster than anyone else. We provided digital discovery faster than anyone else. So the county attorney's office always had an open file policy. And while I was in the county attorney's office, I watched the Michael Morton case unfold with the district attorney's office, and I saw how DNA exonerated Mr. Morton, and it was a great thing for that to happen, and it was a great thing for me as a young prosecutor to see happen. You know, that case was handled back in the 80s when people didn't take their oaths and their commitments the same way they do today. The reason I became a prosecutor was because I had some experiences as a kid where I was experienced crime, and I decided I wanted to go to law school to help victims. And so I went to law school to find a way to help victims, and that's how I ended up being a prosecutor. But I believe that when you deny someone their due process rights, when you prevent evidence that could exonerate them from coming out, you create just another victim. And so for me, as a Christian, that is wrong. As a prosecutor, that is wrong. And so you'll find that I have a track record of always turning over everything. I have a track record of always being fair and balanced with defense attorneys. And that's why, in fact, the president of the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association has endorsed me, because he believes that I have been fair to him when we've had interactions, and I've been even-handed. And so that's my background. But the Michael Morton Act was a great thing. It's very important that we have open file policies. And one last thing, in the primary we had the judge, Sid Harrell, that presided over the Michael Morton case, and we've covered this issue extensively, and it's a great thing that he made that decision. So kudos to Judge Harrell, and I thank you for asking that question.
I have one other question along that line. It seems that both of you candidates for place 5, both the candidate and the candidate's representative, say that the candidate is a constitutional conservative, and I'm assuming he would therefore be anti-judicial activism, so to speak. Mr. Wheless, do you have some comments you'd like to make about judicial activism regarding your campaign?
Well, let me say this. The role of a judge is to make sure that the case was tried properly, and that the rules of evidence were followed, that the rules of procedure were followed, and that a just result occurred. But also sometimes judges, particularly on the Court of Criminal Appeals, look at statutes that are passed by the legislature. And so one of the primary purposes of the Court of Criminal Appeals, because we're talking about the highest criminal court in Texas, we're talking about a court whose responsibility it is to review these statutes passed by the legislature to make sure that they are constitutional. And so we've seen the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals strike down some statutes because they were unconstitutional. That's happened just this past year. So that is a role. That's not judicial activism when the Court of Criminal Appeals does that. Judicial activism is whenever a judge steps out and inserts his or her opinion in place of the legislature or in place of the jury. And that happens with trial judges sometimes, where they decide that something should be done rather than what the jury did in the case. That's judicial activism. If a judge, acts because of his own personal bias or interest in the case, and ignores the law and the evidence, well, then that's judicial activism.
Mike, I have a question I'd like to direct at the candidates for place 5. And there was a perception following the primary that your father, Scott Walker, may have benefited from a confusion on the part of some voters that the governor of Wisconsin was running for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And I wasn't at all these forums, but I've been led to believe that he did not campaign all that vigorously and did not show up at a lot of these forums, yet got over 800,000 votes, perhaps due to the fact that the name Scott Walker was on the ballot. So given the importance of experience and qualifications for this highest Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, what do you think is your father's strong suit? Why should the voters select him for this seat? And then I'm going to ask Brent to answer the same question.
Sure, and I appreciate it. That's a great question. And, this idea, in fact, was somewhat perpetrated by my dad's opponent, Mr. Webster, and that is that he somehow was using, quote unquote, the name Scott Walker to his benefit. And in fact, at some point, Mr. Webster put it on his official Facebook page that my father had actually changed his name to Scott Walker in order to deceive the voters, which was, I think, finally he realized that was.
Well, his name is Richard.
It's Richard Scott Walker. That's
Correct.
correct. And here's his yearbook from 1966. This is one of 12 of many that shows that one of 12 of the years that he had yearbooks, obviously, that have showed that he's always gone by Scott Walker since the day he was born. There's plenty of references in here and football photos and things of that nature. My dad has always been Scott, and my dad's been my dad for 38 years, and obviously I can attest to not only his qualifications, but I can attest to some of the things that he's passionate about because he's my dad. I mean, I know him pretty well. He did not change his name to Scott Walker. He did get 833,000 votes, in fact, in the primary to Mr. Webster's 411,000 votes, and he got more than the second and third place finishers' votes put together. Now, I don't think that was because my dad happens to have the same name as the governor of Wisconsin. I would give the voters more credit than that, and I would think that it would be undeserving to the voters, and it would be really kind of a slap in the face to Texas voters to say that just because my dad happens to have the same name as the governor of Wisconsin, that he would get that kind of turnout. Now, he did do campaigning. I'm my dad's campaign manager, and I was a candidate for the legislature many years ago. I ran against an incumbent Democrat. I lost by 120 votes in a 4-county district. So I know a little about running races and politics, and we had a very strategic campaign in the primary, and it was very effective. We relied a lot on social media. There was a lot of stuff that I wasn't able to do back in 2008 when I ran for the legislature that we were able to do in his judicial race in the primary. I think some of this idea about the name and the benefits that he had was...
Well, okay, let's get aside from the name, but so we have a career prosecutor, and then on the other seat we have 2 sitting judges. So just from a criminal law standpoint, what's the case for electing Scott Walker?
Absolutely. Well, experience is a big deal. My father has had over 100 criminal appeals, and of course this is an appellate court, and I would argue that when you're appealing a case, that when you're trying to get elected to the highest appellate court in the state of Texas, that you'd want to have some appellate experience in prosecuting appeals, writing appeals, authoring briefs. Dad's written over 100 of those. He's had over 1,000 criminal cases in his career, and he's sit in front of over 40-something juries in full jury trials. So he knows the practice of law. And of course, you compare that with Mr. Webster's experience. If you go to the Court of Appeals website, the official appeals website for the state of Texas, you'll see that he's authored, he's been given credit for authoring 1 misdemeanor appeal in his career where a brief was actually submitted to the appellate court when it came to actually appellate work. And I would compare an attorney who's actually had 100 appeals and compare that with that 1 appeal. And I would say that's an important factor. You look at just criminal law practice in general, I think that's significant. If you go to wilco.org, which is the official county website in Williamson County, you'll find that if you look up many of the prosecutors who work at the district attorney's office in Williamson County, you'll see that they have thousands, in some cases 1,200, 1,300 cases attributable to them in which they were first chair. If you look up Brent Webster by his name, you will see that he has 0 cases attributed to him.
All right. So Brent, what have you been doing for the last 10 years up at the Williamson County District Attorney's Office?
You know, this is the most shocking thing. You know, the reason Brian Walker's here tonight, guys, is his dad can't make these claims without violating his ethics.
That's absolutely
and so what you see Scott Walker. It's a fact he did not campaign during the primary. You look at news reports about that were not perpetuated by me. The Dallas Morning News reports he was not running a campaign during the primary. San Antonio Express News reported he was not running a campaign during the primary. Houston Chronicle said he was not running a campaign during the primary. Independent news sources, even here in Austin, KView, reported he did not run a campaign during the primary. So I think it's a fact, and this is uncontrovertible, that he benefited from the name of Scott Walker. And you'll see that on Election Day he did well from voters that are likely uninformed about these down-ballot races. That's the unfortunate thing about judicial races. A lot of people are uninformed about who these people are. So the facts are that he did not campaign. The fact is he benefited from his name, Scott Walker. The fact is he's not here tonight to tell you anything. His son's here. The fact is I've handled over 4,000 criminal cases, and I am really lowballing that number for you guys. I've had 100 trials. To say that I've spent the last 10 years doing no criminal law might be the strangest attack I've ever heard in my life. And this is backed up by the fact that I'm endorsed by everybody in Texas that does endorsements in these races, and conservative groups, Republican groups. My mentor, Judge Paul Pressler, who's helped me through my career. I've gone to him for advice during my career. He's endorsed me. You look at the DA in Comal County, who is the prosecutor of the year last year. She's endorsed me. She's worked with me as well, seen me at prosecutor conferences. And finally, I just encourage you to do a little search on the internet about me. You'll find that I've had some cases covered by the news. Here in Austin, GoFundMe. You may have heard about the case. I think it was on KXAN. They did a great story on how this GoFundMe scheme occurred. I was the prosecutor in that case as well. But I encourage you to do your homework, and I encourage you to make Scott Walker answer for these things, not his son.
Can I respond to that just real quick? Because this is where I was going
Okay.
earlier, and it was about the newspaper issue. One of the things I told my dad as his campaign manager is I said, right now, we have to focus on the voters. And at one point, I advised him, I said, there's going to be newspapers trying to get you to fill out questionnaires. They're going to be interviewing you. At some point, we'll have an opportunity to talk to those newspapers. But candidly, right now, I think the Republican conservative voters are more important. That was probably a strategic, bad decision on my part because it was apparent from me advising him in that way and him making those decisions that the newspapers weren't happy about it. So there were a couple of newspapers that said things like he apparently has chosen not to campaign, and that was because he just didn't return their call, and they were upset about it. I've experienced this with the liberal press where they get mad about conservatives not doing what they want, not jumping how high when they ask them to. And so, and I wanted to point this out. I've stood in for my dad 2 times in this campaign, 2 times. My father had a very important thing that he had to do this afternoon, couple of settings, and that's why I'm here, and I think it's important. And he hasn't gotten all the endorsements. My father was endorsed by the former Chief Justice of the Second Court of Appeals, who said, in addition to a conservative judicial philosophy, experience as an appellate advocate is an essential qualification for the state's highest criminal appeals court. Unlike his opponent, Scott has both the conservative judicial philosophy and, having handled over 100 criminal appeals, the appellate court experience we need on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. I never said that he doesn't have any experience being a prosecutor. What I said is he has no cases attributed to him as being first chair in a trial or in a criminal case.
All right, I want to ask Ray a question here, but I think we can agree that Sid Harrell is an experienced judge,
Trial judge, absolutely.
has a great reputation, and he made the circuit, and somehow, with the 4 candidates on the ballot, he got the fewest number of votes. So I think it's certainly possible that some people were confused by the whole Scott Walker thing. But so Ray, my question to you is, in your race with Mary Lou Keele, the voters have to figure out which of these 2 judges. You're already judges. You just want to get promoted from the trial court to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and you both have criminal law experience. You have other experience as well. What would you point to the voters of what your strengths are vis-a-vis your opponent, and maybe particularly when it comes to things like judicial temperament, maybe predisposition for or against parties in the case, anything of that nature?
Thank you, Mark. Glad to answer the question. Well, first of all, I've handled every case that Judge Keele has handled. She can't say the same about me because she's never handled the kinds of cases that I've handled, including civil and family. I have a broad background in all areas of the law. I've tried everything from capital murder to DWI cases, so I've done it all, seen it all. But number one thing about the difference between me and Judge Keele is that there are no stories out there on the internet about me. You can go Google my name, and you can try to find some stories that are controversial about cases that I've handled, and you won't find a single thing. Now, you can do the same thing with Judge Keele, and you'll find the cases that she's handled. She's been involuntarily removed from a case over in Harris County because of bias. She's been criticized by the Washington Post, the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News because of her handling of a capital case. She's had one of the most infamous wrongful conviction cases in Texas history, the Brandy Briggs case. There are lots of cases that she's handled that have drawn attention and notoriety to her. One of the other famous cases that she's been involved with was a case involving a former state senator from Harris County, Don Henderson, where a jury sent him to prison because of driving drunk and injuring some people, and she set aside the jury's verdict and ignored the jury's verdict and then gave the gentleman probation instead. That's judicial activism. So I think the difference in temperament is clear. I'm not a judicial activist. She is. I'm also a conservative Republican. For those of you out there that are Republicans watching, and I don't think we got too many Democrats watching the show. Is that right, Mike?
I pretty much believe that.
Except my accident.
I am a Republican. I'm married to a conservative Republican. My opponent is married to a Democrat. Now, why is that important? It's important because the person we're running against, Judge Larry Myers on the Court of Criminal Appeals, started out as a Republican back in 1992, but he switched to the Democrat Party in 2014. So he's the only statewide Democrat office holder, and it's important that we take this seat back. Now, Judge Keel's husband is not only a Democrat, he's an active Democrat. He ran for judge in Harris County as a Democrat in 2014 with Wendy Davis in Battleground, Texas. And he lost, but he ran against an incumbent Republican over there. And on his website, he trashed conservatives, said that conservatives had destroyed the civil justice system, and that if he were elected, that he would level the playing field as a judge. Now, whenever Judge Keel, if she's elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals, when she goes home at night to talk about the issues and the cases before her, and we're talking about the most important criminal cases in Texas, she's going to be talking to a Democrat and getting his views and his ideas. And in a few years, as Texas starts that transition from red to blue, which we're going to have to fight against, they're going to be knocking on Judge Keel's door trying to get her to switch to the Democrat Party just like Larry Myers did.
I had a question, Judge Wheless, and it's this. I had the good fortune of being able to attend a runoff roundtable at Texas, for the Texas Central Republican Assembly at Texas Land and Cattle Restaurant a couple of weeks ago. And Ms. Keel was at that roundtable. And at that time, this issue came out. I want to ask you about this on air. I think she was making a significant point about your lacking board certification in criminal law.
She did.
Is that true?
I'm not board certified in criminal law. I'm board certified in civil trial law and personal injury trial law. The Chief Justice on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is not board certified in any area of the law. 5 of the judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals are not board certified in criminal law. The Chief Justice on the Texas Supreme Court is not board certified in any area. These are voluntary tests that you can take. You can also have years of experience. These tests are usually taken by young lawyers. After 5 years of practicing, that's all you have to do. You take the test, you become board certified, and then that's something that you can use to say, I've got some experience. You can use that for advertising purposes. A lawyer who's been practicing for 20 years like I was, I've been a judge for 15 years, 35 years, the equivalent experience far surpasses any board certification.
Okay, thank you.
Well, turning back to place 2, so experience is important. Having a strong background in criminal law is obviously important for this court. Now, Brian, I understand that your father does not specialize 100% in criminal law. His website says criminal defense and some sort of Veterans Administration benefit appeals. Why do you think that gives your father the strength of experience? And maybe you could talk about some of his endorsements in addition to the retired Court of Appeal judge that you were referring to earlier.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And so as far as my father, Scott Walker, has practiced predominantly criminal law. I would say 90%, maybe 85% of his practice has been criminal law.
Has he ever been a prosecutor, or has he always been on the defense side?
He's always been on the defense side. That is true.
Okay.
And he was a little bit older when he got out of law school. He was kind of a non-traditional law student when he got out. He just went straight to work, and one of the things he immediately did, he had a construction company, had a very successful business, and this is over 20-something years ago, and went to law school, and then he started practicing criminal law, and has done it ever since. 85% of his practice, like I mentioned, he's had over 100 appellate criminal appeals. He's had over 40 criminal jury trials. He's handled over 1,000 criminal cases as attorney of record. All the websites will show it. And but he also has done some VA disability benefits cases. In fact, I kind of got him into this. Being in the military, I started getting some phone calls of veterans who were being denied their disability benefits. And my dad it piqued his interest at the time, he was doing 100% criminal law, and he was upset about how people were being wrongfully denied the benefits that they were entitled, and just how terrible the VA can be at times. And so he started taking some of those cases, and has won several veterans, thousands of dollars in back benefits that they were entitled to and should have had up front. I'm glad you brought up the question about the endorsements, because John Casey, the Honorable John Casey, former Chief Justice of the Second Court of Appeals, is not the only individual or entity that's endorsed my dad. In fact, there's a new place on his website, Scott Walker for Judge, where you can go and find lists of other attorneys, other individuals who have endorsed my dad. There's a long list. Some great practitioners across the state, all over the state. We have attorneys in Houston. We have attorneys in Dallas-Fort Worth. We have attorneys down in San Antonio area, I believe. Just the entire state. My dad has supporters across the state who have endorsed him in his candidacy. And I think that's significant. I think attorneys, at the end of the day, know what it takes to be a judge. I think they are probably the best individuals to tell who's qualified and who's not. And he's got a ton of attorneys who have gotten behind him. Mr. Webster brings up the fact that the president of the TCDLA had gotten behind him, and I would challenge anybody watching this to call Sam Bassett and ask him why he endorsed him. I think Mr. Webster gave a reason, but I think if you were to call him, I think he would tell you it's because he knows Brent, because he practices in Williamson County, and they've practiced on the other side of the aisle before. But look at the girth. Now, Mr. Webster says that he's been endorsed by everybody. Well, here's the deal. He's been endorsed by some of these groups that are like the Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Texas Values. And if you know anything about what's going on in the Republican Party right now, there's this chasm between a lot of different groups. But there's several groups statewide who have a core of donors, namely Tim Dunn, the oil and gas guy out of West Texas, who supports all of the groups. And so way it works is, and I'll tell you, when I was a candidate, it was the same thing, and it worked to my benefit at the time. If you get that first endorsement, the rest of them typically just kind of fall into place. And the reason being is because in a lot of ways, the money's coming from the same individuals who are funding these same groups, and that's just the way it works. Now,
This is a Republican runoff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a chasm.
So, I mean,
Sure.
voters pay attention to
Absolutely.
these groups.
Absolutely. No, and some of these, and I'm not discrediting these groups by any means, but I can tell you anecdotally, you get that first of there's about 6 or 7 groups, and it's pretty easy after you get that first one to get the rest of them, because in some respects they defer to one another because it's efficient, and that is the truth. I'm not being disingenuous at the least. And also because they share the same donor base in a lot of ways. And a lot of people will tell you that there's in fact, some of these groups, they have the same umbrella. In fact, you can go to one of them, fill out a questionnaire, and you are actually answering questions for, I think, 5 different groups by filling out one questionnaire.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Brent to give him some chance to respond to this. So there's been several different points made that criminal defense work is a good background to serve on this court, that these endorsements are meaningless and whatnot. And let me ask a question, because I don't know that have any of the candidates from the primary, the Sid Harrell and Steve Smith, endorsed in the runoff, or do you just want to talk about your endorsements?
I would love to answer those questions.
Okay.
First of all, yes, Steve Smith, one of the primary opponents, endorsed me immediately after the runoff began. Now, Judge Harrell, he is a judge, so he can endorse.
Okay.
He takes his ethics pretty seriously. He's a great guy. I'd like to think he's going to vote for me. We spent a lot of time on the campaign trail together, so he's a great guy. Regarding the criminal defense attorney issue, I promised that I'm going to go and I'm going to be a fair judge that's going to uphold the Constitution and it's going to defer to the legislature. I'm never going to legislate from the bench. My opponent just this week sent out an email saying there are over 3,500 criminal defense attorneys in Texas. If our people embark on a collective effort to get our attorneys elected, we could make a profound change to the Court of Criminal Appeals over the next few years.
And I would challenge him.
I've interrupted.
My dad didn't send that.
Well,
he was not
here's the
author of that email.
thing. Once again, his dad's not talking. Mr. Walker's talking. But he's made a promise here that he's going to make a profound change for criminal defense attorneys. That's not what we need in judges. That's not what this state needs in judges. The state needs fair judges that are going to follow the law. Now, there's been a lot said here about lawyers supporting. I have lawyers supporting me too. But there's a lot of lawyers that support people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's a lot of lawyers that support liberal judges and say that's who we want. But we live in Texas, where our judges are voted for by conservatives that vet these judges, and they want judges that are going to follow the Constitution, that judges that believe in the original intent of the Constitution, judges that will never legislate from the bench. That's what we get in Texas. We aren't ruled by some elite group of lawyers that come down. And don't get me wrong, I have lots of lawyers that have endorsed me, but I also have every Republican group in Texas that endorses in these races endorsing me. Not just the groups he referenced, which I don't know why he was disparaging these groups. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility is a great group. Texas Right to Life, Texas Values, Texas Alliance for Life is a great group. I could go down a list of all the different conservative groups that endorse me. And by the way, I just mentioned two groups that are probably opposed to each other, but they both come to the agreement that I'm the right choice for this court. And then I have CLEAT, Combined Law Enforcement Agencies of Texas. I have Tea Party groups across Texas. The reason these matter, and this is my final point, I will go to the next question, but the reason these matter is these groups vet candidates and ask them questions, and they really test to see, is this really someone who believes in the Constitution? Is this really someone that will uphold the laws passed democratically by our legislature? And I passed that test for everybody. My opponent has been endorsed by none of those groups. So mark my words, no major Republican group and no major conservative group has endorsed my opponent. And you have to ask yourself, why?
And if I may respond to that, because you're pointing out some situations. So my father has been endorsed by groups, he has been endorsed by individuals, and I'm not disparaging those groups. I'm just saying that they are subject to error. We're all human beings, and we do make mistakes. And they have endorsed someone who has very little experience for the state Supreme Criminal Court, and it overlooked an individual that has vast experience that makes him well more than qualified for the state Supreme Criminal Court. And I think that's extremely important. Earlier, Webster talked about the fact that he's had this open file policy and he's concerned about every individual litigant or whatever it was that he said. I think it's important to understand that he was at the county attorney's office in Williamson County, like he mentioned, when the Michael Morton thing was taking place in Williamson County, when John Bradley, the former district attorney of Williamson County, refused to turn over information that would exculpate Michael Morton, and then he chose to go and get a job for John Bradley at the district attorney's office. So if he cared so much about making sure that every individual litigant has their say, then why was it after he witnessed that, as he said, go and get a job at John Bradley's district attorney's office and work for him for almost 2 years before the boss that he now has ended up running against him and beating him when Brent Webster chose to support her when he realized that she was probably going to win the election?
In fairness to Brent, I think he was probably in elementary school when Michael Morton was convicted.
I think I was 7 when Michael Morton was convicted.
Yeah.
This is just the oddest attack.
Well, during the process of him being exculpated, during the review process, John Bradley was asked to turn over certain documents, and he got in deep trouble for it, that he didn't do it. It ultimately led to his defeat, and that was at the time that Mr. Webster was referencing just a few minutes ago. So that's...
On new files.
Yes.
Okay. So, Mike, I don't want to monopolize this.
No, it's okay. Judge Wheless, I had one question for you to try to aid our viewers as much as possible. In your view, what are the 3 primary reasons that you would be a superior choice to than compared to your opponent who was unable to be present today?
Well, number one, we elect judges in Texas. I'm a Republican, and no one disputes that I'm a Republican. All across Texas, I'm the recognized conservative in this race. All these groups that we just discussed here, they've all endorsed me, and that's because they know I'm the conservative. Also, I'm the candidate with the best judicial temperament. I've never been recused from a case. I've never been kicked off of a case because of bias. My opponent has. Also, I'm the judge that has the most experience in all areas of the law. Also, I'm the only judge, the only candidate in my race who was in private practice. It's important that someone that goes to the Court of Criminal Appeals has actually represented a living, breathing human being, which I've done. My opponent was a career prosecutor before she became a judge. She was just an appellate prosecutor, and she's never ever practiced law. She's never been out in private practice. She's never had a real client. So I'm the person that's best for reviewing these cases Any prosecutor, any lawyer can go to the Court of Criminal Appeals and rubber stamp all these convictions. The history, the reputation for the Court of Criminal Appeals is that people charged with a crime can't get a fair shake there. And I want to give those people a fair shake. I want to review the cases that are marginal and make sure that the right thing was done in those cases.
Thank you.
So, with respect to this place 5, your opponent puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that she has been practicing criminal law exclusively her entire career, and in fact, she's was a prosecutor, never on the defense side, only on the prosecution side for many years. What, for people who maybe aren't experienced lawyers, could you comment on why you think your background and the different aspects of law that you practice, give you a better perspective to be an appellate judge than somebody that's done exclusively criminal law and primarily from the prosecution side?
Sure, Mark. When we pick juries as trial lawyers, and I was a trial lawyer, I tried all kinds of cases, including criminal cases. A lot of times we look at a person's occupation as being some sort of indicator of how they might decide a case, what their rulings might be. And so someone that's a career prosecutor that's never been in private practice, they're typically going to be state-oriented. Now, that's not always true. I've seen some fantastic criminal defense lawyers that were prosecutors. But generally, when someone leaves the DA's office and they go straight to the bench, it's kind of a reflection of their rulings. And that's what you've seen with Judge Keel, is that she's very state-oriented. Her rulings in cases across the spectrum are very state-oriented. She's the judge who first upheld body cavity searches in Texas. To me, body cavity searches are inherently, per se, unconstitutional. But Judge Keel is the one who upheld those, and the Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed her. That is, they agreed with her that those were okay. Now, the Texas legislature this last year said those are not okay, and we're not going to do body cavity searches on the side of the road. And the Texas legislature overruled the Court of Criminal Appeals and passed a statute effective September 1st, 2015. Body cavity searches on the side of the road are not legal without a warrant from a judge. That's the difference between me and Judge Keel. If that case had been in front of me, I would have said this is unconstitutional, it's not going to stand. Judge Keel, on the other hand, said that's perfectly okay, very pro-prosecution, very pro-law enforcement ruling. And so I've been on the other side of this. I've seen all the issues. There's rarely a criminal case in Texas that's not somehow connected to some sort of civil matter. It's connected to a family violence assault. It's connected to a CPS case. There's usually other issues that are involved. It's not just clear-cut, the criminal justice system. For example, juvenile cases are actually civil cases. Those are handled by the Supreme Court. Whenever a kid is convicted of a juvenile crime, it doesn't go to the Court of Criminal Appeals, it goes to the Texas Supreme Court. So someone who has a background in civil and criminal is far superior to someone who just has been a career criminal judge.
Okay.
And just, Mark, for point of clarity, you're calling their race place 2.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, you were calling their race place 5. Theirs is actually place 2.
Place two.
And then
All right.
Webster and Walker
Yeah,
is
okay.
is place 5.
So are we close enough to the end of the show that we should ask the candidates to make a kind of closing
Yes,
statement?
yes. You
Yeah.
can give 1 minute each.
Okay.
My dad is a great man. He has integrity. He's the smartest man I know. At the end of the day, he's had over 100 appeals, criminal appeals, over 40 jury trials. He's been first chair on all those cases, and the attorney of record in over 1,000 criminal matters. He's a husband to his high school sweetheart for over 41 years. He's my father. He's also the father of my sister, who's a public school teacher. He got his JD from Baylor University and his BBA with honors from Dallas Baptist University. He's a good man. I would challenge you to check out his website at scottwalkerforjudge.com or go to his Facebook page at facebook.com, Scott Walker for Judge. And I would agree with Mark. You need to search out and find the answers. I think it's important to know everything you can about the candidates.
All right.
I would go to wilco.org. I would go to the state court appeals websites and those websites too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, guys. I'm Brent Webster. My website's votewebster.org, votewebster.org. My tagline is Webster for Judge, the definition of justice. I'd appreciate your vote on May 24th. I am the only candidate in this race that has been endorsed by Republicans or conservatives. I am the constitutional conservative in this race, and I've proven to be that. So I'm working hard to earn your vote, and I would appreciate your support on May 24th. Vote Webster.
Thank you, Brent. Judge Wheless, take us out.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you tuning in and watching tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show here. I'm the constitutional conservative in my race, and I think that's clear from all the endorsements that I received. All of the groups statewide that make endorsements in these races have endorsed me. The Tea Party folks have endorsed me. The Republican groups have endorsed me, which is really unusual. But I am the recognized conservative in the race. All of the people in my county have endorsed me, the district attorney, the sheriff, county judge, all the commissioners, all the state representatives. I've been endorsed by the #1 conservative in the House of Representatives in Texas and the #1 state senator in the House in Texas. I am the experienced, qualified candidate for this race, and I appreciate your vote. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Judge. And I want to thank all the Trailer Park viewers and fans for watching, and I would ask that you ask your friends and relatives to watch the show also, to try to inform yourselves about these upcoming runoff races with the judges.
Yeah, and I appreciate Mark coming on. You're a sharp lawyer. He's giving you a run for your money. The Trailer Park lawyer. I apologize for the snafu at the beginning of the show. We had a little problem in 2 or 3 control rooms down, so we got it done. Next week, we'll be back with it's Travis County Republican Party Hispanic candidates. Is that right?
Yep.
And one of our candidates, Gabriel, will be out there at the Cinco de Mayo this Saturday coming up. Go to his website, get all the info, go join it, please do. And these are important races. Today's the last, tomorrow's the last day early voting for Prop 1. Get out there. And in 10 seconds, I guess we'll just say I appreciate y'all coming on. These are important races, and I hope viewers out there learn something. And we do hope to see you here next week. I hope to see you out there at Cinco de Mayo. Bye-bye. There we go.
Thank you.
We go off at 15.